Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for staying for this third phase of the conference. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so honored that I've been invited to do this residency and get to meet really amazing people and get to produce new work. But without further ado, let's dive in. Today, what I'm gonna do is basically connect some of my earlier work to this wonderful word, the keyword we've had, hypernature. So about me a little bit. Basically, I'm an architect. I'm trained as an architect. And I have studied extensively, basically, moving from architecture to interface design. And at the end, I did my PhD in neuroscience. So some of the things that I'll end up with will connect to cognitive science in a kind of very light way, very generic way. And I'm running a lab right now called Speculative Ecology and Bioarchitecture Unit in University of California, San Diego, at University of California, San Diego, where I do different type of works. I grow algae. Now today, I think what's really interesting for me is the concept of hypernature and its connection to this other concept that became really popular, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s, hyperreality. And I remember thinking about this. I was in, architectural criticism. This is a concept that also affected, it's of course resonates with media, but is born within architecture, because a really wonderful example of hyperreality of Baudrillard and Umberto Eco is Disneyland. So what is hyperreality according to them? I don't have a book definition, but basically when things become more real than themselves. It's hyperreality, right? And they pointed this out as a phenomenon, kind of like a cultural tumor or some kind of cultural itch that happened in the West, especially in the United States. And looking at, Disney architecture, which was quite criticized for many, many reasons, right? They kind of had this theory which shows that when there is a lack of history or when there's a lack of essence, hyperreality happens. So in the context of United States, I don't know if anybody had been to Disneyland. Anybody here went to Disneyland? You did. I haven't. 2 people. You did. So I don't know how it is to be there. I haven't shaken hands with Mickey Mouse. But apparently, there are all these different structures that mimic Moscow, Paris, etc., like Eiffel Towers or the Onion Domes, etc. So this was the prime example. Another good example of hyperreality is the photograph of a burger. You're trying to go to the station, you're hungry, you see this like burger. It's more real than the actual burger you're going to get, right? So this was the concept that was born in that time. And we have to understand that it's really connected to lack of something. When there's a lack of something, it becomes kind of hyper, right? And thinking about this entire context, and I immediately thought about a very famous image. And on my screen, I don't see the, the watermark. But this is an image called Bliss from Windows XP. It used to fill our mornings and nights and evenings for Windows users, right? And something that's actually really interesting because it's one of the first desktop images that is, finding this common usage, but it's also historically possibly the most viewed photograph. So it's not Mona Lisa, it's not, I'm thinking of some famous photography from history, it's this image, Bliss, that has been seen by the most number of people. Now, I confused you a little bit there because maybe you're thinking, well, what? We're confused. This is a photograph, by the way. It is not a digitally created image. Back then, this was, chosen to represent California's beauty. It's the meadow, and it's a real photograph. But when it's placed in the context of the computer frame, yes, the frame of the computer, it becomes hyperreal, right? And if you think about it, when we're exposed to screens, even purchasing something at MediaMarkt, like you would see all these really, really delicious, attractive images of nature, and we even call it nature porn. So whenever nature gets into technology, it somehow becomes hyper, right? So then I started thinking about what are some other hypernatural imagery that I've seen, that I've been using in my work. This is by Chris Jordan, another photograph from 2004. Most of you must have seen this by now, right? This image has become the poster child for plastic pollution. Now, when I first saw this image, I had goosebumps. I just couldn't help it. It was before we were all accustomed to hearing plastic pollution. And basically, this is an ultimate juxtaposition of nature and culture, right? And it's in the midst of the digestive tract of a bird, of this wonderful marine bird, Laysan albatross. We are bumping into remnants of our culture, right? This is another image, the one in the middle. The entire image is an artwork that I made. That I found when I was working on plastic pollution. And this is a chair at the bottom of the ocean, 6 kilometers down at the bottom of the ocean. Again, North Pacific subtropical gyre. I'm going to talk about it quickly. And a plastic chair sitting there. Again, I thought this was maybe an example of hypernatural. Some other images, and this is literally how I spend my days. When I'm doing research, I look at like a lot of sad imagery. And could this also be, you know, something we can consider hypernatural, right? So I'm just gonna skip through these quickly because of time. But starting with this imagery, which I think is also hypernatural, I realized that there was something really wrong with, natural systems, biological systems, especially when you think about the ocean. And this project is very old. I will not spend much time on it, but I wanted to bring it up because in the morning session, if you were here, Sabrina Radke, who made this wonderful electronic beings, it's in the main exhibition hall, talked about how she thinks about the post-human from the angle of a world where there are no humans anymore, right? Like nature, we ruined it, it fixed itself, no humans left, and then new things are happening. And I had the same, and actually we then encountered the same thought, or same thought pattern with another pair of artists, right? Jana and Lex also mentioned this. So this was a methodology that I also embraced for this project that I made in 2013 called An Ecosystem of Excess. I'm a research-based artist, so everything that I do has a lot of, literature survey behind it, or correspondences with scientists, or even residencies or lab residencies. And for this project, I basically worked with Linda Amaral-Zettler, who had discovered these naturally evolved plastic-eating bacteria, which had turned into headlines like, oh, the plastic problem has been solved. So she sent me those flashed images of bacteria, and from there on, I designed an entire ecosystem for a post-human world where the ocean was completely full of plastics, right? Again, each creature or each taxa, each element that I designed was connected to a paper. And that paper was about how microplastics in the ocean change the composition of the ocean to the degree that insects start migrating to the ocean. Because normally aquatic insects don't like salty water or pelagic ocean. So that's a major, ecosystem change. So I focused on that, and I made plastic-eating insects, etc. This is an old project. Another, aspect of this was how plastics came to be. And I did research on pre-production plastic pellets, which you see in the background. What happens is they escape the industrial borders and end up in the sandy beaches, and in the, again, digestive systems or the bodies of living animals there. So focusing on that, I designed an entire plastic sand full of, again, plastic-loving, plastic-eating creatures. And this is Pacific balloon turtle. I come from California, so there's this phenomenon called balloon pollution in California. And I was like blown away by that, like balloon pollution, because they celebrate openings, I don't know, end of school, etc., by releasing balloons. And there I found a paper which showed that balloon, when a hungry turtle was presented a clear piece of plastic versus balloon, the hungry turtle would always eat the balloon. It's a weird paper, but it's really inspired me to design this version of a turtle that can actually endure balloons, right? And another species here, I'm just going to speed up here because I want to talk about our current projects. This one is interesting for me because I was really thinking about the impact of, and this ties to, again, Jana and Lex's work and Sabrina's work, our kind of unintentional hand, right, on these biological systems. Here, Coca-Cola again, and I was fascinated by the fact that in nature, there's this phenomenon called food-based pigmentation. So certain creatures acquire certain colors based on the food they eat. Not us. I wasn't eating, raspberries or glittery things to have this. But birds, especially, for instance, some migratory birds are really good at this. And I realized that, well, plastic pollution is a big problem. And again, I found another paper that showed that 30% of the content of a marine bird's digestive tract was plastic bottle caps. I thought, well, if they keep eating this for, eons and eons, maybe they will also show Pantone colors. And I came up with Pantone colors, meaning corporate colors. So I came up with like the Coca-Cola red bird or the avian pink, the sunny blue, you name it. Now, this is an old project, and I did see a plastic bottle cup attached to a bottle at the airport when I landed here. So things are changing, which is good. Is the change fast enough? We don't know. So then I also had to really, I don't know why I did that back then, but I wanted to really make sure that these creatures would live and survive and they would metabolize plastics. I didn't want to come up with some kind of far-fetched fantasy. We're already surrounded with so much of it. So I designed organs. I really thought about this, guys. I think this one would work, actually, because it has these vesicles inside which would host different types of bacteria that Linda's team has discovered. And if you pass, seawater in it, it could actually filter things. So I'm just going to skip some of the installations. This is turned into a continuing installation, and right now it's, I think, in Switzerland. Now, next hypernatural image that I want to talk about. This is another, interesting image, and I'm sure some of you might have seen. I'm not sure about the 1993 Coca-Cola ad, but I'm sure some of you might have seen the situation with polar bears at the very Nordic border of Russia and how they're kind of coming down to villages and such. So I also thought this was really interesting, a very interesting juxtaposition. I'm just going to play this, and I need sound. Do I have sound? So following this, I came up with this project called Global Warming Yoga Studio. I'm throwing in like very different format at you here, but again, I was fascinated by the fact that we're creating this hypernatural situation, especially for this, again, legendary animal, another poster image for climate change, right? And I designed a yoga studio. I was practicing hot yoga back then, and I'm really interested in activating our body for basically creating longer-lasting memories. Again, back to neuroscience. When you're acting upon something, your body gets more involved, and that does create a different type of sensation in you. So I had these heat lamps. There were 317 of them. So I wrote global warming filming on the mirror. This type of yoga is very popular again, Californian. Bikram yoga, it has different names here. I don't know if it's popular in Berlin, but then people could come and practice here. People performed in this like in 3 different locations. So now let's come to the project that I'm showing here, and I think I have enough time for this. The images I'm going to show and like the work I'm going to show right now is mostly digital, right? I work in the digital domain, and all the apps that I primarily use are industrially acknowledged, kind of, industry standard apps. And most of these apps would have updates, right? And you'll have to update your computer because they are trying to get more and more hyper-real, right? The rendering has to become super real. And so I thought about this. Can we take the music from this? Yeah. I thought about because I just want them to kind of rotate. So while I was working with this software, there's always this push to make the more realistic thing, but I really, coming from where I come from, I wanted to play with this, right? I like that some things are almost cartoonish and some things are more stylized, but there's also this realistic aspect. That's kind of a vague place to be. And I'm just showing some characters that I worked on. This one was, this is a project actually that I'm constantly meaning continuously working on, and it's called Genetically Designed Gods. It's 9 characters, all of which are genetically modified, and it's looking at a maybe near future where a certain genetic modification of even brain tissue could be possible. And this character you're looking at is an athlete. I don't have the full film time to show the film. She's an athlete designed and sponsored by Nike, and at some point she's winning all the competitions, etc. This is a time where Nike is running the show. There are non-national Olympics. It's all corporate Olympics. This is not my idea. I'm totally stealing this from Ursula Le Guin. And she's competing, and then she gets bored, and she becomes Artemis and starts fighting against Nike. Now, these are some studies that I did for the current work here. And I don't know if you've been to the mixing plant yet, but I have 2 pieces there. One is Hollow Earth. It's sort of this diorama piece that I envisioned in that space. And I'm just going to play this while I'm talking about that, because I also realized that I don't have a good documentation of the other work. So I'm just going to go back, and this is supposed to loop. But again, I started in the digital domain, and the keywords that I started with for the project at the mixing plant, thinking about hypernatural and thinking about not just, images and creating more flat images, but really actually modifying our bodies to the degree that we become hypernatural. It's already happening, right? I designed these characters, and let me see what's in the back. Okay, I'm going to come there. And the other pieces in the chimney, and it's a time tunnel. Coming from architecture, when I saw the chimney, I was like, oh, okay, this is a vertical tunnel. So if this was 90 degrees down, we could like walk. And I also really like the fact that it was the end of the cooking plant. And I have some short film there. I don't want to talk about it that much because I don't want to ruin the effect. But to kind of, come back to the theoretical framework, or the more, critical framework that these works are born within, right? Real or not, all stimuli gets processed in the same systems. It doesn't matter if what I'm seeing is real or if it's, produced. Earlier, Soph was talking about this too. We build our own reality. Right, all animals build their own reality. There's actually a wonderful thinker, Jacob von Uexküll, biosemiotician, who talks about this, and he calls this the Umwelt. I know in German it means environment, but the way he uses it is more like the world that you build, and you build it via your own sense and action organs. So all stimuli, regardless of the fact that it's real or not, if it's digitally made or if it's, the work of the hand of evolution, it enters the same system. And if we start treating each stimuli equally, it will cause problems for us, right? So those are the thoughts I'm having, but I'm going to stop here because I have 10 seconds left, and I'm going to use that to turn around and sit in my chair.
Come and join me. Hello. First and foremost, thanks for this wonderful and a bit wild ride through your artworks, research, hypernaturality. And I have so many thoughts and so many, it's created so many nervous stimuli in my head that I wasn't quite sure where to start. And I think the easy way out for a philosopher is always to start with a definition. If you don't know what to do, you go back to what are we actually talking about. So if you're okay with it, I would want to step back a little bit before we address your concerns or questions again, and go back to the very beginning of your presentation. And you started with the idea of the lack, that the hypernature and hyperreality is basically a lot of times caused by a lack, a real one or an imagined one. Maybe it also doesn't really matter which one. And that started me thinking, this whole conference, we've been talking about hypernatural forces, hyperreality. I think there were a lot of definitions in the room.
Right.
I'm not quite sure if we've ever agreed on one. So while I was listening to that, I tried to come up with my understanding of hypernaturality at the end of this basically conference day. And what I took away from it is basically that hypernaturality exists only by human design. We have created the possibility of an artificial authenticity. So hypernaturality is always an exaggerated simulation of a nature of some kind of nature that has never existed or that hasn't existed in this way it is presented because it's better than the real thing or it's sparklier, it's sleeker, it's shinier, it's in some way filling a lack that is perceived there. And in that sense, it feels to me that hypernature has become, and this is a bit of a thesis I want to throw out there, has become a culture. It has become a culture in disguise.
It is,
Is that something that resonates with your understanding of it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're all cultural producers here. I never really thought that I would be actually working on culture, which is very anthropocentric. I thought I would be working on non-human animals, to be honest, when I started working on these projects. It always connects to the human again. And I'm like, oh, okay, culture. But it's so clear to me that all the issues that we're faced with right now, and I'm focusing on, environmental issues. I'm not gonna talk about inequality, war, etc. I'm gonna leave that to another panel for another person. But when we look at, the environmental crisis we're in, and Timothy Morton just says all art is ecological, right? And that's where I am. It's really clear to me that, look at classical. It's not about the material itself. It's really about the routines. It starts with the routine, and then it becomes kind of like a habit. Right, and then it becomes kind of a behavioral pattern, and then gets multiplied. People kind of copy it, and it becomes like a social behavioral pattern. It becomes almost a tradition, right? And when something becomes a tradition, then it's almost like cost in culture. And I think consumption, consumer culture in general, I always think about how do we there are triggers, we respond and we don't even think about it, right? So I think all of this is cultural at the end, yes. But back to your question, I think it's what we were doing here, is perhaps our way of, responding to losing nature, right? We're being separated. Maybe we're feeling a separation anxiety.
Yeah, that completely resonates. And it directly, again, gave me a couple of directions to go to.
Right.
When you said you never, we are all cultural practitioners here in some degree or another, and you never imagined yourself on this like anthropocentric side of it. That is something I wondered. Is this too loud?
I'm just gonna be like this. No.
Am I too loud?
I'm
sometimes
touching this mic. So sorry, guys.
When I look at a lot of your work, that was something that really spoke to me, because in some areas it's so clearly transgressing certain dichotomies, and you, in your art production, also very clearly transgress certain dichotomies. You are coming from research, you're doing artwork, you don't follow some expectations there, and at the same time, you said yourself that you wanted to move from just calling out for attention to also offering solutions.
Yes.
And to addressing, because this huge environmental issue is so obvious,
yes.
to also address those big crises that we've created
yes.
as humans. However, the way we are doing it, and I would say you as well, is coming from a very anthropocentric perspective, and the offering the creating artworks or creating microbe or bacteria that would eat plastic are then a human-created solution to a human-created problem. Is that something that worries you sometimes?
Of course it is, and I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't have a slide for that, but I have this really big architectural installation in Venice Biennial, and I titled it Hollow Ocean 2048. So I'm just going to refer to that paper in relation to this question. In 2006, Boris Worm, a scientist, publishes a paper. I don't recall the full scientific title because it's long, but it's really about the impact of biodiversity loss on the oceans. And the paper does these, talks about these calculations and fishing and fisheries and fishery health, etc., numbers, and says, and spits out, a year by year 2048, it is likely that there will be no, marine life left in the ocean, no fish left in the ocean. They don't use the word fish, though. They use marine life, right? And then this becomes news, for instance, in National Geographic, and then the title is, the paper is Biodiversity Loss, Impact of Biodiversity, and the title is, Seafood Might Be Gone by 2048. Like, really? What you're thinking about is, like, you can't have sushi, like, that's the problem here? So, I mean, it does make sense in a way, because it's our animality. We are in our bodies, and like the body desires things, and we're in our immediate environment. We always respond to our immediate environment, right? But at the same time, there's just something really wrong there, right? So my concern doesn't really lie in protecting human race, etc. My concern lies in really protecting biological systems at large as a unity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I still feel that there is some tension, but I think maybe there is also tension that one cannot get rid of, and that might lie in the very foundation. If we see that we cannot get rid of our desires, and the seafood is an example.
Right.
As we are conditioned in a certain culture and environment, it's our first response.
Right.
Then, I mean, the wanting to help also is part of human nature.
Exactly.
And, that's wonderful as well.
Empathy, yes, exactly.
Historically, it hasn't always had the best results either. But I think in this tension, there's also even within just the existence of the artwork or the desire for the art, there lies an interesting different tension. If we, for example, look at the polar bears that you that you showed, there we can see at the very same time the desire for the nature and the animal, and we can see the exploitation of it. And this whole panel is somewhat framed under the question of the end of exploitation.
Right.
And I think in the polar bears, I think this time you didn't even mention it. It's the first CGI very.
Oh, I forgot to mention that. Yes.
Maybe you can tell that a bit later.
Yes, it's a historically significant point we have to make. It is the very first CGI animation. Yeah.
And it has been such a success, and people.
It is.
It cost. There was a lot of desire to then create more of those polar bears, to then create movies based on that technology. And as this technology is closer getting to the nature that is being lost, this technology itself is exploiting the environment. Also the Bliss example, every of the billion views, every energy that is used is basically part of the exploitative system. So even I think in the desire itself to create something that that is lost at the same time by that, there might be a tension that we at least need to acknowledge, right?
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, sorry, that was really not a question. But it was something that when I looked at all the examples, that really made me wonder, because if we dislike so much, if we desire the images of nature so much that we create better natures and we end up creating better images and simulations and virtual environments that at the same time are hurting the environment that's surrounding us and that is still out there.
Right.
How do we recombine this, or is that even possible? Do we actually call attention to the environment by creating environmental aware digital art?
This is a good question. It's like kind of a paradoxical, almost like speaking of tunnels, a maze question you asked me. Okay, let me enter the maze here. I have a couple thoughts about this. Number one, there needs to be environmental art, and it's already happening. A lot of us are responding to this. I've been doing this for quite some time now, and it really cherishes my soul when I see other people kind of making beautiful work. So that has to happen. Why? Because we are cultural shapers. We are literally, I sometimes call myself, what do I call myself? A synaptic sculptor. And people are like, I'm like, it's what I'm doing, guys, because our brains are learning machines, and every experience that you have leaves a trace on you in your nervous tissue. Like, let's not be super focused on the brain itself, like the entire nervous system, entire body. It leaves a trace on you, right? And art is one of the best ways to orchestrate the human sensorium. It's one of the best ways, like we can do this. And once you actually send like an intentional, arrangement of stimuli to the audience, and they respond to it, first by receiving it, right? Maybe they're checking their phones, but it's going somewhere. I don't know. Then perceiving it, and perceiving is more conscious, doesn't have to be completely conscious. And then emoting on it, which means we always have an emotional response, every single thing. I don't want to, there are no volcans among us. Some politicians, yes, I'm pretty sure some politicians have removed their emotions completely. But we can't make, any decision. We can't just stop emotion. So emotion is there, right? And it's very important for art. And again, I think it's Deleuze and Guattari in What is Art? Sorry, What is Philosophy? And funny, they answer what is art in a book called What is Philosophy, right? They're saying that art is the intensification of sensation. So we intensify it, and then we meaning artists, and then we can orchestrate this, and it's perceived by the audience, and there's an emotional response. But then it can also become conscious thought, and it can become something higher level, right? Higher level meaning there's a sequence of how stimuli is processed in the body. So that's what I'm talking about. Like the stimuli hits your ears, 180 milliseconds. It takes longer for it to become a thought, but the artwork will trigger this sequence, right? So,
and your artwork a lot of times doesn't only trigger one stimuli, right?
Not at all.
Speaking of the hot sauna or the global warming, it seems a very clear decision of you to involve different senses that are stimulating the body even more and bringing the body that might be lost a little bit into that reflective process.
Exactly. That's why I love Stephanie's work. I love visceral work so much because of that, because I want to have access to every sense that my audience has. I want to have access to my own senses too, because I'm working on myself. I'm my own test subject, right? But let's go back to the question. And the role is here, that thought could stay with that person when it becomes a memory, right? We're very good at making memories. Some nations aren't. I'm Turkish. Turkish people can't form memories, obviously. We keep electing the same guy again and again and again. I'm like, okay, like this. And back to this, that's very powerful in creating culture. So by making this artwork, it might not feel like it at the moment, but you're creating a different thought, maybe a different memory, and that's already synaptic sculpting. Because for a memory to form, neurons have to communicate with each other, and when that happens, they stay like that. So they actually geometrically change, literally. So that's sculpting, right? And that's cultural sculpting too. Like that's how we build culture, right? By exposure to these kind of novel experiences. So. Yeah, while I agree
I have to
with,
admit, when I heard you talking about culture for the first time, that was really an interesting experience for me. It was on the Zoom call, when I wasn't really sure what kind of culture we were talking about, and that might bring me back to this philosopher's how do we define things problem.
Define culture.
I was first like, maybe also because there are so many awesome marine biology or other biological references in your work. Maybe she's talking about bacteria culture, and and our own body is made out of so many bacterial cultures that are also constantly redone and are being sculpted or could be re-architecturally designed. And I was like, oh no, this is probably a more traditional understanding of the cultural understanding, of an understanding as culture as a basically umbrella term for collective conglomerations of social norms, behavior, institutions, whatever. And then I thought how wonderful it is that so many thought-provoking pieces that you show have all those layers to it, that one can go in from each academic discipline or from each sense or stimuli one approach it, it opens up basically an umbrella of thoughts.
I mean, thank you for saying that, but we just mentioned Umberto Eco. I mean, for the longest time, I loved their concept of open work. Like, I can't control what the audience will feel, emote, think, remember. I can't completely control it, but I can put them on a trajectory on the path, right? And that's possible. This is not esoteric. There's a science to this, and a lot of artists hate me for saying that. But I can do this, right? And then, of course, I start thinking about, like, as you mentioned, layers, like, what are the certain senses we can use? Multimodality is a term here. What are the, like, even how the audience will approach the work? Like with the time tunnel, we noticed that you have to look up for 4 minutes, and I don't want to do that to someone who has neck problems. So all of these things actually affect, like how you, what you get out of the work, like adding references, etc. So it's very, how to say, it's a challenge sometimes, but when it works, it's very rewarding.
I think since we are nearing the end of this journey, and I hope the audience has had a chance to watch your exhibits at the exhibition either before or will in the next days, I think my last question will address the works that you've already mentioned now, but that maybe not everybody has seen. Would you maybe want to take us a little bit in the process of how you envision this works in this specific site? Because this place here also has a really weird renaturalization heritage, being a mine that is a very industrial place that now looks very artsy tonight and very different.
Right.
What was, I think, like the main stimuli that you wanted to hand over to the audience, and that they might take on their journeys to new and different worlds in the next days during this festival?
Yeah, to be honest, when I first came here, I didn't know what to expect. I've been working on climate crisis and fossil-related stuff for a long time, so I'm no stranger to the facts and how serious the situation is. But the site, again, architectural space, nothing can beat that. Scale, nothing can beat that. The site really kind of like warped me. Like it kind of like, I don't know, paralyzed me almost. There were so many moments where I almost, again, felt the presence of coal from different parts of the world, because when it was first founded, the coal came from here, right, Essen. Coal was from the Ruhr area, but then it's gone, then it's becoming important. So I just started seeing, kind of feeling this kind of, history of molecules coming in, molecules living in bodies, getting into this, etc. But it took me literally 10 seconds to realize that this is the crime scene. Like 20, I don't know, 100 years from now, we're gonna go. There was a time where human beings were burning fossil fuel. Can you believe it? And they built these structures for that. And I was like, this is a crime scene. So that was my take. That was my first impression. Back to the tunnel and the specific site. I chose them because when I was studying architecture, I had this one professor who dressed really well. I had a crush on her. And she once said, if you're a true architect, you walk in the site and you hear your name being called. So I was like, am I hearing my name? I was like, okay, I think I do. Yeah.
Thanks for letting us hear your
Thank
name
you
as well.
for the conversation, and thank you for staying with us, dear guests.